Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside our lead college football writer, Bill Bender at sportingnews.com. And once again, Bill, we are welcoming in a special guest this week, as we have the countdown has now reached 28 weeks until week 0. Welcoming in Steve Sipple, the columnist for the HuskersOnline on the On3 network. One of the best information centers for Nebraska football. Steve has covered Nebraska football for more than a quarter century. Steve, thanks for making some time for us today.
Glad to do it. I was glad to see both of you guys. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Bill Bender suggested you as our first guest. I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, Steve's a great friend. I've had the chance to get to know him through the Big Ten years on his radio show every once in a while. He does a great job. He's, to me, the best source for Nebraska football. So that's who I go to when I need something. So, Steve, I'm just going to cut right to it. I read your column about Matt Rhule and Tom Osborne, and I know you know this as anybody that's been around the program. How does Matt Rhule advance the program while paying homage to that past that we always talk about from Tom Osborne, that impossible standard that you were covering in the 1990s? So far, so good, right?
Yeah, I just think it's a matter of being genuine. And guys, Matt Rhule's 48 years old, so he understands what Osborne did here. He's not, he's still pretty young, but he does remember that era, Osborne won his first national title in 1994, then won subsequent national titles in 1995 and 1997. So there's a reverence that's very genuine that Rhule has. You can hear it. I mean, it's not phony at all. And I don't. Hey, Bill. Right now, I don't know. Rhule's 2 months on the job. I mean, he's got to advance the program. You're right. I just don't. Right now, I don't know how much he worries about that. I think it's just been sort of spontaneous, his interactions with Osborne. They met at an Outland dinner in Omaha, sat together, talked for an hour, and Rhule was genuinely captivated. So I think it's been pretty spontaneous so far.
So I was looking at Matt Rhule's resume, and of course he's got a reputation for being a big turnaround guy, especially at the college level. But it was interesting to me. It doesn't happen right away. Year one at Temple, he took over a team that was 4-7. They actually went 2-10 his first year before the big turnaround. Year one at Baylor, took over a team that was 7-6, and they actually went 1-11 in year one. And then, of course, got him to the Sugar Bowl a few years later, had a great turnaround. Year one with the Panthers, took over a team that was 5-11. They stayed at 5-11 in year one. So he's got the track record for the turnarounds, but not necessarily right out of the gate. The Nebraska fans going to be patient?
What do you think? I'll tell you what, Bill, you hit a hot button topic here. That topic's a hot button one. I have said that I don't believe there's any reason they have to get off to that sort of 2-10 and 3-9 type start with the returning talent. Now, it's hot button, though. When you say that, people automatically think, oh, there's Sipple applying pressure to the head coach. No, it's not that at all. Or there's Sipple kind of defending Scott Frost and what he left. No, not that. I mean, that's people. There's a genuine disdain for Frost around here right now. It's not that at all. All it is a respect for the returning talent. They have 10 guys returning on defense that have started. Actually, 11 who have started games. There's one who started one. The rest have started multiple. 10 guys back on defense who have started multiple games. It wasn't a bad defense. Not for the final 8 games. It was an okay defense. Not great, but okay. They have a starting quarterback back. They have a starting running back. They have 6 offensive linemen with starting experience back. It's not a team that you look at and say, oh, God, it's a debacle. Now, some people will try to sell it to you that way. I just don't buy it. Right. So, I mean, the last game of the year was a win at Iowa, which Iowa was playing for the division title, and Nebraska beat them on their home field. I mean, so yeah. Hey, Bill, believe me, you'll get reaction on that question.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, obviously you and I have talked about this, and since Nebraska has come in to the Big Ten and establishing their identity, and I was just curious, we've talked about this a little bit, how much do Nebraska, or how much do you measure this program up against Ohio State and Michigan versus Wisconsin and Iowa? What should Nebraska strive to be? Or even I could extend that to the new Big Ten.
Yeah.
When UCLA and USC come in, where does Nebraska fit in as a program with Matt Rhule among all those programs?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion about that. I mean, there's the thing that makes sense. The scenario that makes sense, I think, to Nebraska fans is, all right, win the West Division first and then worry about the big boys. I have always said you always have to keep Ohio State. If you're Nebraska, you always have to keep Ohio State in your sights. That's what you're ultimately chasing. And Michigan. I mean, you have to say Michigan now. So I've always said that. And again, another hot button topic around here. Other people say, no, it's got to be a step by step. You got to win your division first and then worry about that. I just think that's, I don't know. You're settling a little bit there. I mean, what do you want to be? You want to win the Big Ten. It's not about winning the West. It's about, I never call it a division title. You win first place in your division. It's not you don't get anything for it. You want to win a Big Ten title. So it depends who you ask, Billy.
Well, when you went to Columbus, was it eye-opening for you among being around that fan base and that expectation and that organization around that program? Is that something Nebraska can strive to be? Do you think they can get in that zip code with Ohio State and Michigan?
Yeah, I'm old now. I'm 56. And was it eye-opening for me to go to Ohio State? No, it wasn't eye-opening. I've seen it at Nebraska. I mean, I covered Nebraska when they were winning national titles. It looked like Ohio State. Talent was probably maybe in some cases better than Ohio State's been. Think about it. I mean, think about it. The team that beat Florida in the Fiesta Bowl with Tommy Frazier and Lawrence Phillips had 18 guys on defense that played in the NFL. I mean, 18 in 1 year. I mean, I've seen it, Bill. But Nebraska's now a long way away. And what people wonder around here, if they could ever get back to that. I think they can, but I don't know. A lot's going to have to fall into place.
You talked about two hot button topics. How about a third hot button topic, potentially quarterback?
Yeah, you've hit him, Bill.
Jeff Sims coming in from Georgia Tech. Yeah. I'm here in Atlanta. I went to a few Jeff Collins practices this year. Went to a couple games. I like him. I didn't think he had a lot of help. Had Jahmyr Gibbs stuck around one more year at Georgia Tech, that certainly would have helped Jeff and that offense in general. He did not have a great offensive line here, but it seems like Matt Rhule really likes him. Casey Thompson, of course, coming back. You mentioned as a returning starter. I think he's 24 years old at this point. That could be a hot button topic in the spring, yes?
Oh, God. Yeah, you guys have done your research, which I really appreciate. Yes. Definitely a hot button topic. Casey Thompson was the starter last year, started 10 games. He wasn't the problem. When he went out, it was a bit, I don't know if you saw the Michigan game when they just didn't have anything behind him. Casey hung in there, played well, but there's a big problem. Casey had shoulder surgery recently and won't be available in the spring. Okay. Which means Jeff Sims, to whom you alluded, can get a big leg up. Now, none of this is a surprise to Casey. I've talked to his dad, Charles, who was a great option quarterback at Oklahoma, and they knew Nebraska was going into the portal, and their posture is bring it on. But it's going to have to wait. So their plan is for Casey to rehab the shoulder, get better in the spring. He might be able to throw a little bit, probably won't practice, but then, in May and June, then he'll hope to find some rhythm. And you know how it is now. June doesn't really shut down in programs. It's not like there's not coaching per se, but there's organized activities with the players. Casey hopes to get some momentum there, take that June and July momentum into preseason camp, and then take back that job. I've been that voice that says you can't. Casey did too much for this program just to elevate a kid from Georgia Tech ahead of him. But Bill, people are doing that here.
And, there's a relationship, I guess, between Jeff Collins and Matt Rhule, right? And
Yeah,
so I think Rhule knows what he's getting, more so than maybe just a little bit more of an unknown transfer or whatever. So that could help Sims.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, it's been interesting, guys. When you listen to Matt Rhule talk, he's very effusive in his praise of Sims, not so much Casey. Now, it might just be familiarity, He is very familiar with Sims. He regards him as a potential NFL quarterback. Sims is very provocative because he's 6'4", 220, can run, has a good arm. Actually, you've seen it, Bill. He throws it downfield well. So I get it. He's a very provocative quarterback because of his size, speed, and arm.
Well, so here's a good one for you. Which game would register more if Matt Rhule won it in September? They go to Colorado versus Coach Prime, and that guy's getting a little bit of attention, Steve, down there in Boulder, old Nebraska. Which one would register more in Lincoln, if they beat Colorado or if Michigan rolls in there on September 30th? And I'm assuming that one will be in prime time somehow, and Nebraska wins that one.
Michigan, I'd say by a long way. The Colorado game, I get what you're saying, because if you saw a few years ago when Nebraska went to Colorado, it was an ungodly scene. I mean, Nebraska, 60-70% of the stadium was red. That was a hot Big 12 rivalry. People love going there here. I love going back to Boulder. It brings all kinds of memories back. But man, come on now, Michigan just in the playoff again. Michigan back-to-back Big Ten titles, helmets, tradition. I mean, Nebraska, when it got in the league, they envisioned games like that, winning games like that, and that sort of win, elevating the program. So Colorado, come on, what was their record last year? They'd lose 11, I think. Michigan, no, hey Billy, Michigan by a long shot.
And you just mentioned it. So you remember when you were a kid and you got that question about where you're going to be in 5 years, or your first job interview, and they said, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So I'm going to ask you that as part, where do you see Nebraska in 5 years? You and I have talked about their identity in the Big Ten and how it's different from the Big 12. And there's probably a cross section of Nebraska fans that still wish they were playing Texas and Oklahoma every year. Where do you see this team in the new Big Ten in the next 5 years? Can they take advantage of being kind of the geographical center, so to speak, of the conference?
You got to kill me, Bill, but
I'm sorry.
No, you're going to kill me. I can't do that. I'm not going to do this thing where we've done this a lot around here, where a new coach comes in and the fan base and the media, we start making wild proclamations. We certainly did it with Frost. It's too early. He's Matt Rhule, Billy. Matt Rhule has been here for 2 months.
Right.
I don't know where he's taking this thing.
What about the program? Do you think with USC and UCLA in the conference, is that an advantage for Nebraska in terms of maybe they can try to recruit and push west a little more and get some kids from California? How does that help do you think that helps more than it hurts, maybe kicking off some rivalries with those two?
I think it could help. Rhule's concentrating on Texas more than Nebraska has in a long time. Now he's going to go to the state of Texas. Nebraska, when it was rolling, when we alluded to the Osborne years, they went to California a lot and got players. California was a hotbed for Nebraska. So yeah, they could benefit from that. But what I think, Billy, it's more about, now I've been staunch on this. Nebraska has everything in place. They have a very high level NIL operation. Okay. They can pay. I mean, they're well-heeled, well-organized. They also have a new athletic training facility, a football training facility, basically, right next to the stadium. It's $160 million. It'll be top 5 in the nation. Now, what kind of weight does that carry anymore? Not sure, but it can't hurt. And it isn't going to hurt. I mean, it's going to be top of the line. So you combine NIL with that amazing training facility and the fact Nebraska still sells out the stadium. I mean, still it's a fervent fan base. It's a very hungry fan base. There's no reason Nebraska can't get back to being an upper echelon Big Ten team. And then, of course, being a top 10 team. It should happen. But what we've learned here is it's not going to happen if you don't have the right people. And now Matt Rhule has brought in 39 new players, 28 incoming freshmen, junior colleges, and 11 out of the portal, and 39 staff members, all new people. So, I mean, not all new people, but a lot of new people. And is that going to work? I don't know. We'll see. I think the early indications, people are pretty excited, but it's, again, 2 months.
Yeah. So, I was going to talk to you about recruiting and this new group. I mean, he was hired on November 27th. And usually the first class is a transitional class, not very good. You don't have time to get these guys in. Nebraska finished 24th, according to 247, which is excellent. It's up from 41 the year before under Scott Frost, who'd been there for a while. I mean, he was obviously on the hot seat, so I'm sure that's what knocked them down. That cycle, Frost was 20th the year before. But were you surprised that Rhule was able to get this transition class pretty solid pretty quickly?
Yeah, I'd say I was surprised, more impressed by the operation. Rhule is a grinder. We've had coaches here that aren't. I mean, grinder has different connotations, but he's a nonstop worker, and he demands a lot of his young staff. He's got a young staff, and they're everywhere. Very aggressive. So, yeah, I guess I was a little surprised, and I think Nebraska fans, guys, I think it's always with a lot of the fans now, it's pretty halting optimism, but there's optimism, and it's a pretty good class. And I look at more of the portal. They went and got some pretty good players in the transfer portal. That guys that got to help. They needed help. They got it at some spots, but where I wonder about still, they didn't go out and get the big boys. They still need help up front on defense. They still need at least one more defensive lineman, if not two, and they could use another offensive lineman or two. And, the portal's going to open again in mid-April. I don't know. Everybody's looking for those guys. Can Nebraska get them? I don't know.
All right, Steve. Bill, you got anything else?
I was going to leave. Who is your favorite reporter to see at Big Ten Media Day every year?
Bill Bender.
He's the
most colorful for sure. The language can be colorful, which I appreciate.
Give me trouble.
You're fine. We're sports writers. You're very professional, and friendly, and knowledgeable.
Well, Steve, I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, one of my good friends in the business. Love coming on your radio show with Jake, and hopefully we do that soon. And you know what? We'll be back in Indy before you know it. So thanks so much for your time. And for our listeners, make sure you read this guy. If you want to know anything about Nebraska, he's the best.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it, both of you guys. It's nice to come on with you. We'll do it again. I'll tell Jake hi, Billy.
I will. Thanks so much.
All right, see you later.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was good. That was a good guest. Good idea, Bill. Caught up on Nebraska. Definitely going to be a fascinating team next fall. They've always been fascinating under Frost and all those close losses and how they just never reached the expectations everybody thought Frost would fulfill for them. But it's going to be a fun team to watch next fall.
Well, the reason I appreciate Sip so much, I always tell this story about him. He doesn't, as you see with his answering our questions, he doesn't waste time with coaches either. He goes right at them. I remember one of my first experiences, I was up at Big Ten Media Day, and remember when Ohio State had Cardale and Braxton in this race, and everybody was kind of dancing around Urban with the questions, and Sip went right at him, and it's like, all right, what's going to be the thing that who's the starter going to be, and he's like, what are you going to measure? And he didn't waste any time. So great reporter, good dude, and one of the best, like I said, when it covers Nebraska. But not the only program with things going on right now.
No. Let's go down to Alabama, where Nick Saban has filled both of his coordinator spots as vacant offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. He went with Tommy Rees, as people well know at this point. Tommy Rees leaves Notre Dame after 3 years as offensive coordinator. He is 30 years old. And then defensive coordinator, he went with Kevin Steele, who returns for his third stint with Nick Saban in Alabama. He's also been defensive coordinator at LSU, Clemson, and Auburn. He's 64 years old. So we got a little new school and a little old school for Nick Saban's choices. What stands out to you there?
Well, with Kevin Steele, I mean, I guess I would have to fill out the bingo card to see how many SEC schools he's been at. I mean, he's probably got a shirt for every team almost. And that's somebody he obviously can trust. The resume, I know Grantham's name, Alabama fans weren't real excited about that. I think Kevin Steele's more of a ultimate safe pick because Saban can get his fingerprints on that defense. The Tommy Rees one, and I'm going to defer to you a little bit because you obviously follow Notre Dame very closely. Surprised, when you made that list of guys that were going to go, he didn't even cross my mind, mainly because when Marcus Freeman decided to stay at Notre Dame, about 10 minutes later, there was a video of Tommy Rees saying he's staying. So, I mean, that was one of the more surprise hires, but I'm not saying it's good or bad one way or the other.
Yeah, it was interesting. He passed up on a lot of money to go with Brian Kelly to LSU last year. And, presumably the talent that LSU brings in traditionally is better than the talent that Notre Dame's been bringing in. But he decided to stay for one more year. Maybe he wanted to get out of Brian Kelly's shadow a little bit and stretch his legs. His season was handicapped a little bit by losing a starting quarterback in week 2. Tyler Buckner had to go with Drew Pine. There was mixed reviews. Some games that they look like they schemed things up pretty well. Some games not so much. They underperformed against Cal. They underperformed against Stanford. They underperformed against Marshall. By the end of the year, they sort of hit their stride. And then in the course of the bowl game, Drew Pine had transferred. And then all of a sudden he was back to Tyler Buckner, who hadn't played in months. And Buckner came up with 5 touchdowns, and Notre Dame won that game. So, Nick Saban talked to a few people. I don't think Rees was his first choice, but it's his final choice. And, obviously he's going to get a raise. He's going to get, better Jimmys and Joes than he has at Notre Dame, and an opportunity to, if he does excel, then the next step is, potential spot in the NFL, potential head coaching spot. He's only 30 years old. So tough to leave your alma mater, sure, but not many people are going to turn that spot down at Alabama.
Well, yeah, you're getting handed the keys to the Porsche with the quarterback, the talent around it. I think Tommy Rees, I actually think the work he did with Drew Pine was outstanding this year, because we had talked about it during the season. When he was efficient, over 60%, Notre Dame was in good shape. There was a couple rough games, obviously, but it was what it was. And then Buckner in the bowl game, obviously, there was good and bad. But at Alabama, I mean, the standard is different. If Tommy Rees is successful there, he'll be either a head coach or an NFL coordinator within 2 to 3 years, and that puts you on the fast track to do it. I mean, and in this case, it's not a renovation, which Saban is so famous for with Sark and Bill O'Brien and Lane. This time it's a promotion of sorts. Who would have ever thought that going to Alabama as the offensive coordinator is a promotion from Notre Dame? But in some ways it is, because of where those two programs are right now.
Yeah, no question. Which brings me to some Trocchi Trivia, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Trocchi Trivia. It's going to center around Tommy Rees, who played for 4 years at Notre Dame, started as a sophomore, started as a senior, lost the job as a junior, was a backup as a junior. Who was Notre Dame's quarterback when Tommy Rees was the backup his junior year in 2012? I'll give you the year, 2012. We will answer that question at the end of the podcast. So that is our Trocchi Trivia this week. Who did Tommy Rees back up between his years as a starter at Notre Dame? So where does this leave Notre Dame? When it comes to whoever comes in, this is an attractive job, right? They've got Sam Hartman from Wake Forest. You got an experienced quarterback who is trying to use his final year of college to get more prepared for the NFL draft. And, it's away from that slow mesh offense that Wake Forest runs. No NFL team really runs that. I think part of the allure of Notre Dame was going to what he thought would be a pro style that Tommy Rees would use. So I'm guessing whoever they bring in is going to, try to have a pro style attack. I've seen, Akron coach Joe Moorhead as an intriguing option. He was, of course, head coach at Mississippi State for a couple of years. Not a good fit in the SEC. He did fine, but it just wasn't a good fit. He's worked for James Franklin. He's worked for Mario Cristobal. Right now, he is the head coach at Akron. And another name that you might be able to shed some light on, Josh Gaddis, right? Broyles Award winner at Michigan, left for the same job at Miami after winning the Broyles Award as the top assistant coach in the country, and then had a disastrous year at Miami, was fired after 1 year. So he went from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain in 1 year. He's obviously available, got some Midwest background. What do you think of those names and where Notre Dame might look?
Yeah, Gaddis is interesting. A little bit of the shine off of him this year and how things ended at Michigan, because it wasn't exactly mutual. There was some things said after Gaddis left both ways, and then same with Alabama. But he does have a very good background with successful programs. His last year at Michigan was amazing. Very good at working guys, speed and space, that type of offense. That became a catchphrase in Ann Arbor when he was there. Just kind of peeking through some things. Byron Leftwich is another name coming up. And that would be very interesting to me, because that would mean Leftwich, sometimes it's hard. I do think Notre Dame is the type of program that you can pull a guy down from the NFL and he can have success there, because the way their offense works with the tight ends, with the way that they want to run the football. I guess the big question is, are you going to make your next hire based on the offense you want to run for the next 5 years? Just like that question I asked Sip. That's like the worst interview question in the world, by the way. Or are you hiring a guy for Sam Hartman? And you mentioned that mesh offense and the numbers that he was able to put. They're really good at throwing the ball down the field with guys like A.T. Perry. But I think it's going to be the first option. I don't know that they're going to hire somebody specifically for Sam Hartman, nor should you.
Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. I don't expect it to drag out too long. They did hire Al Golden as their defensive coordinator last year after the Super Bowl, and that took a while. But, of course, Marcus Freeman is a former defensive coordinator. He's going to have his footprints all over that. Fingerprints, all over that side of the ball. Offense is a little bit different. So we'll see where that goes for Notre Dame. Should be interesting. One last thing before we go for this week, I wanted to go over a story we had on sportingnews.com last week. It was about the top 10 quarterbacks who passed on the NFL draft. Of course, Sam Hartman's one of them. That there's a lot of returning talent at quarterback across the country. And we ranked them. You and I talked about who was where and things like that. And we both settled that number one, we thought, was Michael Penix at Washington.
Yeah, for sure. And then you got 3 Pac-12 quarterbacks on this list, but he definitely is somebody that definitely going to, be in the Heisman conversation coming off 11-win season. Got tapped back into the playmaking skills that he had at Indiana. He's a great choice at number one.
And he's got his top 2 receivers back, both 1,000-yard receivers, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan, which is huge for them. Washington as an offense led the nation 370 yards passing per game. And they've got their quarterback and their top 2 receivers back. So look for big things out of Washington. I think Penix probably would have been second, third, maybe fourth round pick this year. So it's interesting he decided to come back and try to up his stock to a first round grade, I would imagine. You mentioned the Pac-12. Number 2 on our list, Bo Nix at Oregon. Similar path, transferred, and the change of scenery really did him well.
Yeah, you'll have to have a new offensive coordinator, obviously, but you've been around the college game, super experienced. I think Oregon, when the top two, those are two quarterbacks, when they see each other next time, Penix and Nix, it's going to be a huge game. And who would have thought that 2 years ago, that Oregon and Washington would have a marquee quarterback matchup with those two guys in 2023? I certainly didn't.
Yeah, and they went at it last year too, and it was phenomenal. It was great. And one thing, Oregon actually lost their offensive line coach this week, Adrian Clem, to the Patriots. Bill Belichick dipping into the college ranks again. Clem played for the Patriots, but he was their offensive line coach for Oregon. And Nix, despite tons and tons of passing attempts, 409 passing attempts last year, just 5 sacks. So we'll see where Oregon goes with their offensive line there, but they are down an assistant right now. Third on the list, we had Jordan Travis, Florida State, another guy. He's not a transfer, but he had a terrific season last year, and Florida State's getting a lot of offseason buzz.
Yeah, I think he's the most interesting guy on this list because you watched him in spurts last year. He was unstoppable. I'm just going back to the Florida game and the Oklahoma and the bowl game. Maybe the best dual threat quarterback in the country, at least right on that short list, and could get Florida State back. You mentioned all the composite top 25s and early top 25s. They have Florida State top 5, top 10 team. And, probably the team, I bet when the preseason polls come out and those, ACC predictions come out, a lot of people are going to pick Florida State to win the conference, and Jordan Travis is why.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We had Jaden Daniels, LSU, at number 4 on the list. And then Sam Hartman was 5th. Of course, he set all kinds of records in the ACC, 4 years as a starter, a lot of experience. And Notre Dame's got 2 great offensive tackles back in Blake Fisher and Joe Alt. They've got 3 experienced running backs. I mean, if they can pick the right offensive coordinator, this offense really could be in the 40-point range.
It's funny. You asked the Tommy Rees question, and I can't remember who LSU's quarterback was the year after Burrow right now. But because Jaden Daniels and Brian Kelly's work with him is something they're paying attention to in South Bend, because he's done a great job developing him and getting his skills back in less than a year. LSU, dark horse national title contender. And Sam Hartman to Notre Dame, I mean, this was the guy, I think we agreed, of the transfer quarterbacks, the best one this cycle. And what he does at Notre Dame is going to be under the microscope. And I think he's going to have a very successful season there. So both of those quarterbacks definitely paying attention. I think you ranked them right. Hartman has something to prove, but he's got the upside that he could be as high as number 1 on this list by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. Well, we will leave the rest of the list to folks to go visit sportingnews.com. Before we get out of here, Trocchi Trivia. We'll see if you've got the answers. So who was Notre Dame's starting quarterback in 2012 between Tommy Rees's sophomore season and his senior season at Notre Dame?
I rolled my eyes because I'm going to guess Everett Golson.
You are correct.
Yeah,
Everett Golson led Notre Dame to a 12-0 season.
Yeah, so they played
for the national championship game against Alabama.
And he was a South Carolina. He was South Carolina kid. That's kind of a cheat answer because I knew who he was from. He was in the Carolinas at the time, a high school star. I was trying to do the math of when he played there versus when he was at Florida State for the 1 year. So so Rees went, and they went back to Tommy Rees. And I remember those conversations when Rees was the backup for Everett Golson, and he got some time in there.
Yeah, he did. And that was obviously a very memorable season for Notre Dame. So, well, thanks again. That's our show for today. We appreciate everybody subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We got our YouTube channel at CFB Nation that's been cranking out. It's looking good. The network here is really growing, and we appreciate everybody being loyal listeners and being a part of it. We will be back next week to touch on whatever news and notes that are happening, whatever off-season ideas we come up with. But we're not going away during the off-season as we have our countdown to week 0, Bill.
All right. Thanks so much for having us on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you or listen or talk at you next week at the CFB Nation All-America podcast.